the stage 1 consultation document. When it came out, this was the front cover. There were a number of things that immediately struck you. It was the size and scope of this diagram. Up until then, a lot of rhetoric that had been given was that, well, actually, Bradwell B might only be 15-25% bigger than Bradwell A. Whereas actually, even on the figures that they give now in the recent community forum, was that it was 6 times bigger, and actually I think in reality it's going to be maybe 10 times bigger. The other immediately noticeable thing was the cooling towers. I was concerned about the size of the cooling towers, and one of the things that I did was to draw a sketch which went up on social media channels of an approximate position of the cooling towers, but the correct height compared to the clad Bradwell A buildings. This had a bit of an outcry, people saying, oh, that it's ridiculous, you know, keep it to scale. So I thought, hang on a minute, this is to scale when they're saying it's not to scale. We've based it on the dimensions that they've given in their very leaflet. I will talk about it a little bit more because we went on to do a video. I then talked to an artist and talked to her. She is a resident in Bradwell-on-Sea, and she came up with this diagram, and now this obviously caused even more consternation amongst certain people, but it was not meant to be to scale. It's an artist impression and it shows impact rather than a true picture. However, we decided that it was a little bit apocalyptic. I can't even say the word. So we softened it down a bit with some actual water vapour coming out of the cooling towers. And the other thing we decided was to make a film. If you haven't seen the film, what's keeping you? And we came up with this end of the turbine hall, and with the size of down there, that's me, to scale. And they were saying that it's not to scale. And in fact, what they said was, our website contains information on our current proposals. It includes accurate representations of the power station based on the actual design, which this video unfortunately does not. What they said here was about, the first one was about the cooling towers, 120 to 165 meters in diameter, 50 to 60 meters high, and also they gave a handy little diagram. Now, what was interesting, when we researched hybrid cooling towers, we couldn't find one of this profile, and very few on nuclear power stations. But when we did the film, I'm out on the airfield here. This is a clip on the perimeter track, and it's Mersey Island in the distance. And then we superimposed 2 genuine hybrid cooling towers, probably smaller, but what you can see in the base is the fans. This company says 26 fans round the base, and they're pretty chunky. Now, I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear this. This is a hybrid cooling tower with the fans based in a building. I think it's in Southminster. I can see that Alison kindly filmed this for me. And this
is to demonstrate the noise of 3 40-kilowatt fans.
So we've got 90 decibels there, and they're 3 40 kilowatt fans, so there will be 26 probably per tower, and it might take megawatts to drive them. Now, we move on to the turbine hall and the reactors, 63 meters in height, and the conventional island for where the turbine halls are, it'll be approximately 50 meters high. So here is their diagram, indicative image. We took the end of that model there, we took the end and made this diagram. Now if we do add the dimensions in there, the turbine hall is 50 meters high, I'm 1.75 meters. Most people could figure out that it is simple arithmetic to get this to scale, which we took great care of. However, they were not happy and they came out with this incredible phrase. Basically, they were saying that they have the actual design and the actual dimensions, whereas in their leaflet, that's nonsense, because they're saying that this is both indicative and it will help perform our designs. So this is their diagram from their fly-through video, and let's leave you with this, the idea that there's going to be complete trashing of the environmental designation. It's going to be a complete blight on the southern part of the Blackwater estuary for residents for miles around, and the dangers here are illustrated by this artist impression. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and introduce Professor Andy.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for all turning up on a night like this. It's very, very good that so many people can come to this meeting. I want to just say a few things about what I call the story so far and what next. And this will show in the title of my talk, which Peter's about to put up. Oh, that's nice. The first thing to ask ourselves is, where have we got to now? We go back 12 years. BANG was formed over 12 years ago now, in 2008. And at that point, we were outraged that Bradwell was one of 8 sites, well, there were 11 at that time, but ultimately of 8 sites that were chosen as places for potentially nuclear power stations. And of those 8 sites, some have fallen by the wayside, and we're left basically with 3. The Hinkley Point C site, which is under construction, the only one. There's the Sizewell C site just up the coast from Essex, which is going through the various decision-making processes and getting towards the climax of that. And then there's our own site here at Bradwell. And for Bradwell, we are basically looking at a Chinese design of the so-called United Kingdom HPR Hualong 1 reactor, which exists in China, but is not yet, the actual model for Bradwell has not yet started in operation. So this is, it's a sort of hybrid type design, but it's not yet in full commercial operation. That was the, so, and the other things to notice are, of the 8 sites, you can see them on the screen, and Bradwell and Sizewell are down there on the east coast. And the others at this stage are in a situation of stasis. Now, the Bradwell site, if we can look at the next slide, this is the site. And all that's on that site in that picture is the Bradwell A power station, parts of which have been demolished, and the rest is in cold storage, as it were. The Bradwell B site will be around surrounding the 2 sides of that site, and you've already seen that from Peter's picture. Now, at the moment, Bradwell Power Station is passing through a number of stages of decision making. Is going through land investigation of the site, through the generic design assessment, and is just passed through the pre-application stage for eventual planning permission. And all of those processes are in progress at the moment, and imminently we shall be hearing from the government in terms of its energy policy and the National Policy Statement for Nuclear Energy, both of which have an important bearing on the future of Bradwell. But at this stage, we don't know. It'll be about a month before we have the white paper. And all this time, of course, we've got Bradwell A sitting on the site. Now, how did we get here? We got here in terms of this 12-year program. In 2008, Bradwell was identified, as I said, with other sites. And eventually, although we put up a stiff resistance, it was designated in 2011 as a site, and the phrase was potentially suitable for the deployment of nuclear power stations by 2025. In actual fact, if you look at it, no power station, with the possible exception of Hinkley Point, is likely to reach that target. And very soon, Bradwell will not be properly designated, and that's why the nuclear policy statement will have to reaffirm the site as still potentially suitable. No doubt this will happen, but it is a technicality that Bradwell's site selection is running out of time at the moment. Then in 2015, another significant event took place, which was the golden relationship announced and sealed by the Prime Minister and Chancellor of England and Xi Jinping, the President of the Chinese People's Republic. And part of that golden relationship was to allow the Chinese to try to get a planning permission for their own style of reactor at the Bradwell site. It's interesting to notice, by the way, that the Belt and Road strategy of the Chinese Republic is basically the two Bs, Beijing to Bradwell. It sort of ends up on our shores at the moment. So the Chinese had got the majority control in terms of the partnership with EDF, and they were to use and deploy their own technology, which obviously raises questions which we will come to. And so now we get, there were other things that happened in between these dates, but the next important set of dates has been 2020. This year has reached a very climax in terms of the potential future for the Bradwell B power station. And many of you will know about this. Many of you have been involved. So at the beginning of this year, in March, CGN announced their pre-application. And I have to say, even though we'd spent 10 years thinking about this and making all sorts of observations and assertions, when we saw it, it was like a smack in the face. It was a shocking apparition. Because if you look at it, the design, even in this sort of jelly mold format, is enormous. And the size and scale of this power station will be utterly transformative in terms of its mass, its impact, and the dangers that it poses. It was far bigger and far more intrusive and destructive than ever we could have imagined. And as a result of that, of course, the balloon went up. The local public were outraged. Particularly over on the Dengie Peninsula, there was a campaign developed, and people were beginning to get into mobilize themselves for the long fight ahead. And we, all of us, and I imagine many of you, wrote in our consultation responses to the proposals of Bradwell B, which they're still pursuing. And they put this out, this consultation, just as the coronavirus outbreak came into being, and refused, despite our protests, to withdraw at that point, and persisted with the partial consultation. A lot of public meetings were cancelled and so on, and no doubt you know that the consultation process was deeply flawed, but nonetheless, it has now been concluded. And they're going away to wet their whistles or hang their tails in order to look at the responses that they got, many of which would not have been welcome to them. That premature consultation, as I say, is now gone. Some of us hope that the outrage would be such that they might say, "Oh, let's call it a day, pack it up. It's obviously not a site worth looking at any further." That is not at the moment the case. So we come to the question, in the terms of where we are now, why Bradwell? Well, the next slide, please. This is just to show you this slide here. This is Hinkley Point, at present under construction. Look at the mess of that site. The tallest crane in the world is there. I've forgotten his name, but I think that's the one on the left. They have dug out huge amounts of the earth beneath it and begun to construct the massive containment vessels for the reactors. But the scale of that gives you some indication of what will happen at Bradwell if it comes to pass. And you'll hear the noises that you heard earlier. You'll hear the construction going on. There'll be enormous disruption. There'll be something like nearly 10,000 workers going into that site. And it will have a vast impact on the environment generally. And that will go on probably for as long as 10 years or so, starting towards the end of this decade. But that's what we're in for if we cannot stop this power station. But as the next slide shows, this is desperately needed. Bradwell B, as the chief CEO of Bradwell B says, it'll make a vital contribution to meeting our energy needs, and it will help enormously in reducing our carbon to get us to the net zero carbon position by 2050. And of course, the usual argument, it'll give us reliable and affordable electricity when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, etc., etc., etc. All of those points can be refuted and refuted well by evidence. We've done this several times, and if you want in the discussion, we can go over the arguments again. But one point to note is that if Bradwell B is constructed, it's not as if nuclear will disappear, because Bradwell B would come alongside Hinkley Point C, which is likely to be built, and Sizewell B in the middle of the next century, and that will still be a very substantial nuclear commitment going into the second half of the century. We're already, unfortunately, committed to new nuclear in large amounts. That new nuclear cannot conceivably make much of a difference to our carbon budget, because it'll only be producing for about 15 or 10 years before the target date of 2050. So for that and various other reasons, which we could go into, nuclear is not needed, it is expensive, and it is dangerous, and so on. So those arguments that Bradwell B is vital, and which the government, of course, has been supporting, are, I have to say to you, a complete nonsense. So why not BRB? I think here the argument is that the CGN said in their consultation that the site was already agreed. There's no problem with that. But the fact of the matter is, the whole judgment revolves around the idea that it is potentially suitable. The idea of potentially suitable is surely something testable, and is surely something that we can oppose. And Bang believes and is trying to lead the campaign of resisting the proposal in the round totally, and not in various bits. They want to lead you on to talk about the roads and talk about the design and all those sorts of things, as if it's already a done deal. It is not a done deal, and as much opposition as can be mustered must be mustered against this site. There are three fundamental reasons why this is a poor site. One is it's unsustainable. It's a site that is vulnerable to floods. Next slide. This goes back to 1953. I rather like this because I remember those floods. The 1953 floods are one of the sagas of the East Coast. That happened then, and what might well be happening in the future is far more disastrous on the East Coast, because if you look at the climate change forecasts, and I think they're conservative, and we get a 3-degree rise in temperature, then we're looking at something like a 1 to 2 meter rise in sea levels by the end of this century, progressing afterwards. And with that sort of rise in temperature, sea level rise would be higher, and we have the combination of storm surges, floods, and coastal processes. This gives you an idea of what the flood would be at the highest tide level in the year 2100. Beyond that point, while the power station is still there and the radioactive waste is still on site, we're into the unknown. Nobody knows what would be happening to the climate beyond 2100, don't even know about 2100. And therefore, the idea of putting a power station in a site that is clearly vulnerable is actually unethical and immoral, and something that should be stopped on that basis alone. But that is not something that is hit the imagination at this point. So the idea that you can somehow adapt to that by putting up huge walls and making it into a nuclear island, it's a funny concept, of course, a nuclear island, doesn't make sense in conditions which are completely unknowable, and therefore the site is secondly unsuitable. How can it be suitable when it has massive environmental impacts, transforms the whole of the Dengie Peninsula, infects and impairs the marine ecology of the Blackwater and its important fishing and oyster industries, and when it does immense amenity damage, and has got such things as the cooling system and port development doing incalculable harm both to the landscape and land, as well as to the marine environment surrounding it. Next slide. You get an idea here. We have got a marine conservation zone, which is supposed to protect the oyster and so on. And of course, that covers a huge area. You can see it goes right down to the roach and crouch and up to the cone. And within that area, there are a whole set of other designations as well, overlapping designations. This, believe me, is a very important, pristine, and incredibly valuable part of our coastline, often not recognized as such. But to destroy that would be a willful environmental crime. And the site is also unacceptable. People don't want it, they won't have it. Next slide shows you, in the event of a serious accident, the kind of area that might be impacted. You're going close to Ipswich, out to Chelmsford, down to Southend. About 500,000 people could be affected, and there's no way you can do anything except let those people live under it. There's nowhere for them to go. It'd be impossible logistically to clear that area in the same way that happened at Fukushima. And so we would live under that perpetual threat. Unlikely to happen, marginally possible, but it could happen, and that is, of course, the danger and why people will be apprehensive and find it unacceptable. And it's socially unacceptable in the well-being of the population around here. When you think that 10,000 workers will be on site, building all the accommodation, the road systems and so on, will have a massive impact on the economy as well as the society of this region. And that is not to be minimized. The health impacts could be high, and certainly the economic damage, amenity damage, and well-being generally. And finally, the intergenerational aspect. This thing is here to stay. It goes on into the next century. We don't know how it will be dealt with. But you will still have highly dangerous radioactive wastes and on that site well into the next century. And that imposes burdens of cost and effort and risk on the future generations, which we have no right to impose, and is another reason why the power station ought to be resisted. And so what has been happening finally? What has been happening is an enormous reaction in this region. Colchester Borough Council long opposed this. They put in a rather weak response. There was an uproar at the council, and their position has now changed, and Colchester have been put out a most firm opposition to the power station, and they will no doubt follow that up vigorously. Malden, slightly different. To everyone's surprise, the council there voted against the land investigations, no doubt prompted by the incredible reaction on the Dengie Peninsula to the proposals. And as a result, the situation at Malden Council has been quite convulsive. There has been several meetings, and recently the council has changed hands, and I understand is now firmly in the hands of those councillors opposed to the power station. So two of the most important councils in the region are now standing against this power station. That is a very unusual situation. Normally, in other situations, councils have tended to be supportive on the grounds that they want the jobs, etc. And we have MPs opposed, as well as ourselves and various others. So where do we go from here? The situation at the moment is fluid, unstable, and uncertain. We've taken steps forward in the last 6 months, particularly politically. I think the situation now is one in which the Bradwell company can no longer talk about the Bradwell community and our friends and the way we want to be good neighbours, etc. They know full well that they are unwelcome in this area. But nonetheless, the government is still supporting nuclear power. The Chinese still appear to be firmly backing this plant and are moving it irresistibly forward. And we are waiting the white paper and the national policy statement, which might even give further succor to a nuclear industry. Sizewell is the place in the frame at the moment, and there may be others, resuscitation of the Wilfer plant and so on. All of this looks in a way quite good for the nuclear, but as my friend Stephen shortly will be telling you, a lot of this is very tentative, timid, and one cannot be sure how robust thing going forward is. All I would say is that in terms of the Chinese, this works both ways. The Chinese have probably got the resources, which nobody else seems to have, and could put the money behind it, one thinks, even if it's a lost leader for them. On the other hand, China is not good news at the moment. And the diplomatic side of things might well mean that the Chinese are asked to leave quietly because of the geopolitical situation. The site is a key issue, and we must get it denied. And so, to conclude with those words, wonderful words of Hilda Grieve, who wrote all about the Great Flood in 1953, we may be approaching the denouement. It may happen fairly quickly. But even if the Chinese go, the danger isn't over for this site. We have to get the site written off as a site for nuclear power, not just as a site for CGN. So we mustn't drop our guard, and we need your support and continuing commitment to the campaign to prevent Sizewell B.
Thank you very much, Andy. I can see there's a lot to unpack there. Let's just move straight on, if that's okay with you, Stephen, to your talk. Do you want to go straight into the slides, or would you like to introduce yourself to start with?
Yes, what I want to do in my presentation is just to give you an update of where the British government's nuclear plans stand. And the starting point for that is where we were in 2015 when the deal with China General Nuclear for Bradwell was announced. And at that time, the British government was talking about 16 gigawatts of new nuclear power plants. That's 11 reactors at 5 sites. That's Hinkley, Sizewell, Moorside, Wilfer and Albury, to be online by 2030, plus Bradwell, with an unspecified number of reactors at an unspecified date. The government had also just launched a major program to develop small modular reactors, SMRs as they're usually called, and it had put forward £250 million to be spent by 2020, and it promised a roadmap would be published in 2017, which would show the way to a commercialization of these small modular reactors. So where does that program stand now? Well, it doesn't stand, it's mostly fallen over. The Moorside, Wilfer and Albury projects are dead. The sites are will keep coming back when other developments are talked about. The Sizewell and Bradwell developments are in the balance. Only Hinkley is going ahead, and that's not going well. On the SMRs, the £250 million to be spent by 2020 was forgotten, it was never spent. The roadmap was forgotten, it was never spent, and the government is drip feeding the small modular reactor producers with the odd £10 million here and there, nothing of any consequence to the government, but enough to at least say that the programme is not dead. So the only contractual agreements there are, major contractual agreements, are the EDF projects, Hinkley, Sizewell and Bradwell. And as you all know, the Hinkley deal is that it will be 2/3 owned by EDF and 1/3 owned by CGN. EDF has said it would like to sell some of its stake. The British government has said you can't sell below 50%, but there are no buyers anyway, so it doesn't really matter. For Sizewell, the contractual position is that during the development phase that we're in at the moment, and the phase up to when a final investment decision is taken, EDF will take an 80% share and CGN will take a 20% share. Nothing decided about who will actually own the plant, and under the regulatory asset base funding model, it won't be EDF or CGN. For Bradwell, under the terms of the agreement, a joint venture company will undertake and manage the generic design assessment process. That's the process where the Office of Nuclear Regulation reviews the design, the Hualong 1 design, and approves it to be built. During that stage, CGN will take 2/3 and EDF 1/3. The next phase will be the phase that Sizewell is in now. In other words, the phase going from getting the generic design assessment completed and getting to a final investment decision. Heads of terms agreement, so nothing concrete yet for Bradwell. Next slide, please. So what about China General Nuclear's involvement? There's an interesting cocktail of concerns about China General Nuclear's involvement, from rather specific lack of confidence in Chinese design and quality control, the risk that the project will be a Trojan horse for industrial espionage by China, and a CGN official was convicted in America for spying, security concern about Chinese control of key infrastructure, the sort of concerns that led to Huawei 1 being elbowed out of the 5G project, and a more general distaste at dealing with what is a rather unpleasant regime. I think the issue that people aren't talking about is what happens if CGN is blocked from Bradwell, because it's clear that the only reason CGN is in Britain is to build Hualong 1 technology. It will be a major shop window for that technology, the first major export. It's having difficulty selling its reactors, and if it could build in Britain, if it could satisfy the British regulator, that would be a major endorsement of their technology. So if it can't do that, I would question why it would not walk out of Hinckley. It's contractually obliged to complete Hinckley, but if you want to sue CGN, the Chinese government, good luck with that. So next slide, please. So where do we stand with the Office of Nuclear Regulation? There is this process, the Generic Design Assessment, which is a 4-year process which reviews the designs of reactors that are proposed. And at the end of it, if it's approved, the design can be built in principle anywhere, subject to local conditions. So hence the EPR design that's being built at Hinckley will be approved for Sizewell. It started the generic design assessment of Hualong 1 in 2017, expected to be completed next year. And stage 4 of the 4 stages was commenced last February. And stage 4 is when the real meat of the matter comes up, when the serious issues start to get discussed. I think the experience suggested that it's highly unlikely that ONR will not approve the Hualong 1, but you have to look at the small print. What are they going to ask for that will push up the price of the Hualong 1 reactor? I think it's very unlikely. We won't require more safety measures than the Chinese regulator does. What issues won't have been resolved, and if we look back at the EPR review, the ONR said the design was fine, but in their small print at the bottom it said, well, actually we haven't sorted out these issues, but we'll deal with it when we're building the plant. So there could be some quite substantive issues there. So what about EDF? If you saw my previous talk in Colchester some time ago, you'll know that that EDF is effectively bankrupt. And for 2 years now, there has been this government-led rescue plan, Operation Hercules, to try and rescue it. And the rescue would involve splitting up EDF into 2 parts, EDF Blue, which will primarily be the nuclear part, and that would be 100% renationalized. It's currently 84% owned by the French state. It would go back to full state ownership. And EDF Green, which would include most of the other businesses, the retail business, the renewables, the networks, with the possibility that that company could be privatized. What isn't being talked about is what would happen to Framatome. Framatome is the company that supplies the European pressurized water reactor, the Hinckley design. Would that go to EDF Blue, EDF Green, or would it be spun off again as a separate company? Or would it even survive in its present form? What we don't know is what this would mean for the UK, because the EDF Energy, the UK business, comprises retail, nuclear, renewables, fossil energy. So would that go to Blue or Green, or would it be split up? What would happen to Hinckley? What would happen to Sizewell? The European Commission doesn't like the proposal, and it wants a complete split of the blue from the green parts of the business to avoid cross-subsidy. But the management and unions at EDF want them to remain linked, so to keep the integrity of the EDF company. It's worth saying that Sizewell, under the regulated asset-based model, would be highly attractive business for EDF, because for Hinckley, they will own the plant and will make any losses that occur. For Sizewell, they would just be a profitable contractor, selling the reactor, building the plant, operating the plant, and maintaining it, all with cost-plus contracts. So that would be very nice business for them. Next slide, please. So what about small modular reactors? There is strong support in government for small modular reactors. Dominic Cummings, sadly he hasn't gone yet, is said to be a strong supporter of SMRs, and the Rolls-Royce SMR seems to be the only option that is being seriously considered for deployment. There is money trickling to more radical designs, but those are decades away from being deployable. The Rolls-Royce SMR is not a small reactor. It's 450 megawatts per reactor, so the reactors will have 3 times the output of each of the Bradwell reactors, so very substantially bigger than Bradwell. Rolls-Royce has sort of said what it wants to go ahead with the design, and the design is at a very early stage. It doesn't like to spell it out because it is very unpalatable if you do spell it out. What it wants is an order for 16 of these plants now, so that it can do the detailed design. It does not want to spend money doing the detailed design unless there is that guarantee of 16 reactor orders. Might take a couple of years to do that design work before ONL can start the generic design assessment work, 3 to 4 years to get through that. And maybe they will claim 4 years to build the plant. And that is what's behind Rolls-Royce's claim to have the first plant operating in 2030. So what Rolls-Royce is asking for is a commitment to spend £20 billion of taxpayers' money, because the British government is the only entity that can or is likely to guarantee orders in any credible way. Of course, that's Rolls-Royce's estimate of the cost. The real cost is, if it's less than double that, it would be amazing. And it's asking for a commitment to spend £20 billion on an untested design, a design that's not even complete, that has not undergone a safety review, and from a company that has never built a civil nuclear power reactor. Rolls-Royce has said its first choice sites are Wilfer, Trasvaneth and Moorside. Now, how many reactors could you put on those sites? It might be a stretch to get all 16 reactors on those sites, so maybe other sites like Bradwell, Sizewell, Wilfer, Moorside might be brought into action. So, these sites don't die, they just disappear for a short while. Next slide, please. So what are the prospects for Hinkley, Sizewell and Bradwell? Well, Hinkley is clearly too far advanced politically to be feasible for it to be abandoned, even though it would make good economic sense to abandon it now. The extra money consumers would have to pay to buy Hinkley electricity is 3 or 4 times the amount that has been spent so far on Hinkley. So consumers would be well in pocket if we just walked away from it now, tried to restore the site. If CGN walks out, then that leaves a 1/3 stake that somebody has to pick up. EDF has no money, so I can't see anybody other than the British government taking up that stake, and that stake, maybe £10 billion, that's money that the government can ill afford, and the government is going to have to make choices now on what it goes forward with. It can't go ahead with Sizewell, Hinkley, SMRs, because they all require big money. If Sizewell C is approved with the regulated asset-based model, and under that model, the ownership of the plant would go to institutional investors like pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, other investment funds. Would they be interested in owning a nuclear power station? Well, if it was profitable enough, yes. If it's risky and not profitable, then probably no. So it may be that the UK government would have to take a stake, maybe 30%, to convince the investors that it was a safe project, economically, at least for them. Again, if money is spent on Sizewell, that does leave less money to be spent on SMRs or other models. what finance model would be used for Bradwell? The British government, when it talked about RAB, it said the old CFD model is not dead. It could come back again, and CGN is reported to prefer the CFD model, the model with a fixed price, as for Hinckley, compared to the RAB model. But the kilowatt hour costs for Sizewell are widely seen as prohibitively high. They're 2.5 times the cost of renewables. Why would Bradwell be any cheaper? No doubt people believe because it's from China it'll be cheap, but there's no evidence to support that. And would CGN be happy not to own the plant under the RAB model? Do they actually want to own it? Next slide, please, if there is one. So the UK reactor programme seems to be hanging by a thread. There is not much left of it apart from Hinckley. All of it will require sums of money in the order of £10 billion for each project of taxpayers' money to keep it going. But on the other hand, all the history tells you that the British government is capable of doing anything if it believes it will keep the British nuclear power programme going. So just because it's implausible, I mean, who would have thought a free market conservative government would go in for a public ownership of nuclear power plants? The government's 10-point energy plan has been trailed to be announced next week, but Bloomberg was reporting today that that's going to be abandoned or put back again until after the government's spending review, again emphasising the point that doing anything on nuclear is going to require the expenditure of large amounts of government money. That 10-point plan could abandon projects. Sizewell, Bradwell could be abandoned. I don't think they will, but it can't make any binding decisions to proceed. It can't do anything that is irreversible at this stage to go forward. It can do some irreversible things to abandon projects, but all it can do is to say, yes, we'll go on to the next stage with those other projects. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Yeah, well, I can see some applause. The audience was on its foot. Right, well, let's open the floor to questions. Now, I've got a couple of screens here, so you're going to have to bear with me. If you want to ask a question, give us a wave. Russell, thank you for your comment on the BBC was trailing something about SMRs. Judith has got a question now. If I can find you, Judy. Oh, there you are.
Couple of things. The speaker said that the SMR reactor was 3 times the Bradwell reactor size. I wasn't sure if that was A size or B size.
A. Stephen.
A. Right. So the current Bradwell. And then the other thing is, I'd seen recently in that nuclear news long list of articles that one gets daily, there's apparently renewed American interest in Wilfer. I didn't know if anybody wanted to comment on that.
Yes, I don't know how far this has all been overtaken by the election. It seemed that President Trump was going around the world offering to sell American nuclear reactors, in South Africa and Czech Republic and various other countries have all been targeted as recipients of that money. I don't know where that program will stand under Biden, so I think we have to wait and see what Joe Biden said. I think and I hope that the project would die with Donald Trump.
I can see Tony.
Well, sort of. I was just asking people's opinion because I did some research into Biden, looking at his previous statements he'd made and manifestos. And one of the things that he'd been saying is that he felt that the US should be pushing its nuclear technology as a means of curbing the expansion of Russia and China in this sector?
I think one of the problems for the US nuclear industry is that there isn't much of it left. There were 4 companies selling reactors. 2 of them are out of the business. General Electric, a third one, hasn't really tried to sell reactors for about 30 years, which leaves Westinghouse, which went bankrupt in 2016, which has had 3 owners in the last 20 years, none of which were US based. So it doesn't have much of a nuclear industry. If you look at the small modular reactors, the new scale model, which is the one that Donald Trump was promoting, that was developed by a startup company. They've got now support from a large company called Fluor, but they are looking extremely shaky at the moment, and their shareholders are pressuring them to get out of that particular agreement. So I think the US nuclear industry, I don't think the US government has noticed that there actually isn't one.
Thank you. I can see a question from Linda, and this might be both Andy and Steve might have to fight over who wants to answer this one. Linda, go ahead.
Thank you. I am just starting my video. Hopefully that won't disrupt my connection. So, as Andy alluded to, the NPS, of course, is so important in regards to the site, and us actually having Bradwell removed from it would take away any future concerns, whether that be Chinese, British, or indeed American developers coming in. But what would be, do you feel, given that the NPS itself in the site assessments recognise the unsuitability of the Bradwell site, and I've heard nuclear lobbyists themselves state it's probably the least suitable site, what would be a practical roadmap for us to actually get Bradwell removed from any future NPS?
I can't answer the last question because the obvious answer is nobody knows, but I would like to pick up a point that I made in which you reinforced, and that is, if we get rid of CGN, that doesn't get rid of Bradwell. It's all very well to talk about the situation with EDF and CGN and so on, and they're possibly not pursuing it. But even if that disappears, the site still remains there. It has had a previous nuclear power interest, and I'm not sure who owns it at this moment specifically, but assuming it's EDF or CGN, if CGN go, the interest doesn't go, that site remains available for others to move into. And that's why I was stressing in my talk, and I think BANG supporters need to get this loud and clear, that we are actually opposing the site. We may also be interested in opposing the Chinese and so on, and that would obviously be very, very helpful. But it's the site that you need to get written off. The grounds for doing that, I think, are substantial, except that they will be got round in some way or another. The ONR, for example, may well indeed allow a design of some kind on that site. You can't rely on the ONR to deregulate it, as it were. And so the only practical way forward, I think, assuming that the Chinese don't go, etc., and we still got to fight that site, the roadmap seems to me to be to continually focus on the fact that the site is not only potentially unsuitable, it is totally unsuitable. Now, you refer to the NPS. The existing NPS, which was agreed in 2011, runs out more or less now. It is supposed to be replaced. I wouldn't hold too much store by the new NPS making it impossible for Bradwell. I think it ought to, but there are so many ways around these things. And so long as you have the idea that the national interest is to have nuclear, that is a very powerful argument to put up in terms of the site, because they will ultimately you can invoke the imperative reasons of overriding public interest. And if you say those are so strong that we must have the nuclear and therefore anything goes, despite how awful the site is. So my way forward would be to keep plugging away, because the day will dawn, I believe this firmly, when people will have to recognize that site is absolutely unviable in the long run. And I think that's the strength of our case, and I think that case needs to be continually deployed. I don't see any other way forward on Bradwell and nuclear unless the site is not made available for nuclear in any form.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions from Tim Oxton. Good to meet you, Tim.
Yeah, this is one for you, Stephen, please. I may have misunderstood you, but very near the end of your talk, you said that as things stand, the UK government could not irreversibly commit to going ahead with new nuclear power stations. Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, all I was saying was that in the policy statement next week or whenever it comes out, they're not in a position to make any firm commitments yet, because the next stage would require some form of contract, and they're not in a position to do that. For example, with the regulated asset-based model, they could say that can go ahead, but they still have to find investors. They could say that Bradwell goes ahead, could go ahead, but again, they can't preempt the Office of Nuclear Regulation. So all I'm saying is that they could stop things, but they can't irreversibly make a commitment to go forward on anything at this stage, because they're not that far advanced on any of the projects.
Okay, thanks. But if it's just a matter of them not being able to commit to the investment, that they won't find that a problem, because they've discovered a whole forest of magic money trees, and if they need to produce 50 billion or 100 billion or whatever, so like a rabbit out of a hat, they will do so.
I suspect the Treasury will not look at it like that. I think they will be. They will have seen the amounts of money going out, and they'll be looking very hard at anything else that goes out, anything optional. I mean, the pandemic expenditure is not really optional.
Sure.
Nuclear program is very obviously an optional an option. They don't need to go ahead with it. The Treasury knows they could do it all more cheaply with offshore wind.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, the next one lined up is Bev, please. Good to see you, Bev. If you can unmute and ask your provocative question.
I've wondered this for years, actually. Why is it that this government and previous governments are so keen on nuclear power? Has anybody got any theories about that?
I don't think I've ever given a presentation where that question hasn't been asked, and I have yet to come up with a decent answer for it, because it does not make any sense. There are lots of things that could contribute. There is the military connection. Clearly, it's convenient for the military to have an ongoing civil nuclear program, because that gives them skills, that gives them infrastructure, that gives them facilities. Whether spending, a couple of $100 billion on civil nuclear power plants is the best way to train up a few engineers and build a few factories, I'm a bit skeptical about. It's a potential factor. There is talk about a nuclear lobby, and again, I'm sceptical about that because we don't have any British nuclear companies. The nearest we have is Rolls-Royce, who would like to get into the civil nuclear business, but we don't have any other companies that produce nuclear components. So there is no set of British companies that are rubbing their hands at the prospect of a nuclear program. Of course, we'll sell a bit of steel and a bit of concrete, and some of it will come from Britain, but anything you do uses steel and concrete. So that one doesn't really hold up. I think there's something a bit more, I think you have to look a bit more deeply psychologically. There is some sort of hold that nuclear technology has on politicians that makes them want to keep going back to it despite all the failures. And I honestly cannot put that into any more coherent form than that. So I'm sorry, it's not a good answer.
I don't think there is a simple answer because the question is almost a philosophical one. The fact is, although we may not have nuclear manufacturers, we sure as hell have a very substantial area of nuclear people, particularly in the universities, for example, at the defence establishments, and indeed at places like Sellafield. And those people who've been involved in nuclear technology and still are. That does constitute a very significant, well-paid lobby. I mean, the thing is that these are people whose careers depend on the nuclear industry, and they have the ear of government. And I mean, how they sustain that is an interesting question. But politicians are quite biddable for the nuclear industry, it seems. They're quite biddable, I guess, for renewables. But there is a lot of money in the nuclear industry. Admittedly, a lot of it is government money and funny money, but nonetheless, it's there, and that counts. And nuclear is fascinating. It fascinates me as an academic, I have to say. But you think of these massive machines, they're complex, it's big technology, it's big boy stuff. And that tends to inspire politicians. These are bits of infrastructure. You can say, the government can say, oh, we want some SMRs. And all of that together creates, it seems to me, a mainstream discourse, I would call it, which is pro-nuclear. That can be broken, but it's not broken easily and in one go. It's proving very difficult to undermine the nuclear lobby, and I do think it is that's sustaining it in this country, because after all, it's not sustained in Germany. In Germany, that's been broken. The nuclear industry has actually succumbed for various reasons, which we could talk about. But it is a powerful force, but I don't think it's absolutely irresistible, and that's why I say it's worth us continuing to declare ourselves against Bradwell for various reasons, many of which the nuclear lobby are putting forward.
Thank you. Right. A colleague of mine, please. John Acker, please would you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Peter. Can I firstly thank all the contributors, because it's been a very valuable debate tonight about Bradwell. I want to refer to the fact that, according to the Sunday Times, an ex-Sky employee, Andrew Griffiths, has been appointed to look into the future of the green industry. And the Sunday Times referred to the fact that there's been a meeting this week between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister about the future of EDF. But the impression, which is certainly from the Sunday Times article about whether there could be a bailout of EDF, doesn't look particularly rosy. And this is the basis of my question. I think everyone here is opposed to Bradwell B. A lot of the people in the population around Mersey and Colchester and farther afield have yet to be appreciate the full consequence of this development at Bradwell. The question I've got is what shape should Bang's campaign take in future to win over the local population and those who influence policy to say that Bradwell is a completely unsuitable site? It needs a very vocal and clear public campaign, which I know that Bang has been waging. But what are the elements of the campaign going forward? Thank you, Peter.
I would say, yes, we have waged a good campaign over a long period. The other thing is digging yourself in and sustaining it, even when nothing much appears to be going on. And we're entering a period like that, if I may say so. These are dangerous times at the moment. We've had 6 months of lots of publicity, very clear, I think, sense of direction, and people have been focused. But now with BRB going off to think their way forward, with the GDA still progressing, a lot of the actual activity for Bang, I have to say, is not in the public eye. We do an awful lot of work with government, with the regulators, with the industry generally. We're always, and you can see this on our website, we have to respond to all kinds of things. We're trying to get the argument at where it matters in places like the Department for Business and EIS and so on. And I'm a co-chair up there of a forum. This is hard graft, and it may not appear, but it is actually quite important. As far as the more sort of public side of things is concerned, we're looking for ideas from other people. It's not just for us to say. Bang does continually try to keep some kind of presence and campaign going, and we have to focus on different things and so on. But in terms of mobilizing the population into vigorous action, that actually is difficult at times when the Bradwell issue is not in your face. I mean, you're having to stir up things that have gone latent and so on. I personally think we have a strategy, and our position is well respected in the various places that we need to do our work. And I think the payoff will come. The payoff will come when it gets to the stages of decision making through the development process. We have got enormous reserves of stuff ready to run. But I have to say, I'm frequently told that people don't care, they don't know, and so on. And of course that is true. People's minds will be on coronavirus, on making a living and so on. And the distant prospect of a massive, ugly and dreadful power station does not enliven people unless they feel threatened specifically. They have felt threatened this year. That's been important. We have to try and keep in the public eye all the time that this is going on, it's coming forward, it's coming your way, and you need to try and stop it.
Thank you. Right, we're sort of coming to the end, and I do want to give Varrie her say. We can't just have three grumpy old men doing all the talking. So, but there's a couple of points here. My friend Claire said, should Bang align itself with anti-nuclear energy in the UK rather than maybe seeing as a NIMBY? Well, we don't see ourselves as a NIMBY. As far as Bang itself, the name is Blackwater Against a New Nuclear Group, and that's quite important that we, in some ways, we monitor what's happened with the old stations, but we are against new nuclear power. That's why we campaign with the likes of Hinkley people. We're part of the Nuclear Free Local Authority support network that seeks to work with various local government bodies. So I would say we are very anti nuclear, but it is specifically new nuclear.
I just wanted to reaffirm a point which you were making, and that is BANG is manifestly, and it states it in its terms of reference, we are not aligned to any political party, and we are not just an anti-nuclear campaigning group. We have pro-nuclear people in the campaign as well as anti-nuclear. What we are against, and this can only be stressed as strongly as possible, we are against the Bradwell site because it is utterly unsuitable and unacceptable. That does not make us NIMBYs. NIMBYs means not in my backyard. That we're not saying anybody else's backyard will do. We're just saying that the proper role of local communities when they see something offensive that should not come onto their patch is to resist it. And that we're doing as a form of self-defense. And if that is aggressive, that so be it. But nonetheless, if you join BANG, you do not allow yourselves to be called NIMBYs, which has become a term of abuse, although in some respects, of course, not in my backyard is a very respectable thing to happen when you're faced with unacceptable proposals.
Right, quick points of order, please. Make them quick because I want to bring Varrie in after that. The other questions we'll have to address as a follow-up. Graham, very quickly, please. You make 2 important points.
Yeah, hi. First point is that the national policy statement for Bradwell is for 1 reactor, not for 2. And the barrister that we've been using has confirmed that that is the case and that the actual consultation is illegal. That's my main point.
My own view is that the argument to be pinned on 2 reactors rather than 1 may not have much legal force, but what is the case is that the 2 reactor solution, which CGN have put forward, is vastly bigger than many people ever realized. And one of the things which I think makes the Bradwell site even more unacceptable is the fact that it is gross in terms of its size and the transformation that it will cause in that area.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm sorry. I've got Ted via Johnny would like a word. What we'll do is we'll keep the session open after Varrie's talk for another few minutes for people that would sorry, I've got to laugh. Somebody's just put on there, my dear friend Linda, you've just put on there, proud to be a NIMBY. Brilliant. I'm sorry. Just made me smile. Varrie, over to you. Please, would you, you've unmuted already, and let me know when you want to have your slides, please.
Well, this isn't going to take very long, and it's nothing like what's gone before. I'm Varrie Blowers, the Secretary and the Press Officer for BANG. Some of you know me and some of you don't, but nice to see so many people here tonight. BANG has a variety of very useful resources. There's the website, the Facebook page, the Twitter feed, and the YouTube channel. Peter ably looks after the website and Facebook and the YouTube channel. And Shirley, I don't know if anyone can see her. She's joining the meeting from Spain. Perhaps Shirley could put her hand up. She looks after the Twitter feed very ably. Next slide, please. I don't know if you have actually had a proper look at the website, but it does have a wealth of information on it. And a lot of that is contained in the BANG responses to all the government's nuclear consultations over the past 12 years, the vast majority of which have been written by Andy. And I'll say 2 things about those. The first is that if Bradwell B actually goes to the planning stage, they're going to comprise a very important portfolio of evidence against the building of the new nuclear power station. The other thing is that they're very detailed, well-researched and well-informed. Perhaps when you've looked at them, you might think they're a bit complicated and off-putting, but I can assure you that they generally are a good read. and very interesting. And they also provide very good background education for anyone wanting to find out what is going in the world of new nuclear development and of Bradwell B. The website also has, as you've probably noticed, some very short, I should say some short and very informative films made by Peter. I've already said about the Twitter feed, Bang press releases, and our monthly custom written column for Regional Life magazine. They can all be found on the website. Next, thank you. Extremely lucky with our local media. They have been happy to let us put our side of the story since Bang's inception in 2008, thus providing us with a voice. So our sincere thanks to all of them, and also to the editor of Regional Life, who has given us this monthly column. And Regional Life, as you may know, has a distribution of 28,000 copies around the Blackwater. So that hopefully means we're reaching quite a lot of people. Next slide, please. 2020 has been a very busy year for Bang. Even when it might appear that nothing much is going on up front, we're still working pretty hard. And some of us are involved in, as he said, talking to the public, the government, the nuclear regulators, the developer, local councils, MPs, and of course, quite often with you yourselves. It's been absolutely wonderful because our supporters also have been very busy this year, and we're very, very grateful to the many supporters who, once again, heeded the call and recently objected to the BRB planning application for further land investigations at Bradwell, and who also responded to BRB's Stage 1 public consultation. We would urge you to please keep up the good work. If you could write to your local papers and magazines, to your MPs and local councillors, including county councillors, and also by ringing up your local radio stations and let them know that there is a groundswell of opposition to the prospect of this proposed and grotesque new nuclear power station. As has been said earlier, Malden District Council councillors now wish to change the council's policy to one of opposition to the power station, and Colchester Borough Council councillors have voted unanimously to oppose Bradwell B. We now have to convince Essex County Council to follow suit, so we may be asking for your help again to help with that. Although it appears that things have quietened down, once again, as Andy says, this is not the time to let up. We don't yet know if Bradwell B will go ahead, despite the impression that BRB is desperate to give that it's a done deal. It is far from a done deal. In order for Bang to be better prepared in the future, we're asking if anyone has any particular expertise, for example, in legal issues, climate change, technology, engineering, ecology, or anything else that would be relevant to stopping a nuclear power station. And if you would like to help further the cause, if you could please step forward, because it may well be that we will need some help in the future. With a bit of luck, you may not be needed, but then nothing is certain with Bradwell B. Thank you for listening. It's good to see you all.
Thank you very much, Varrie. Well, my clock says 9 o'clock, and I'm probably a few seconds past, but I did promise some people that we would finish on the button of 9 o'clock. So if you have to go, then we bid you farewell, and thank you so much for joining us and coming out this evening. Really appreciate your response, your support, and your lovely messages. And if you want to hang behind now, I will keep the session open a bit longer for all those that are leaving. Thank you again. We bid you farewell. Safe travels back to where you live, and if you can give us some feedback on what you thought of the way we've handled things tonight, and should we run this type of Zoom Bang session again, do let us know. Thank you. Stephen, do you want to come in on that, please? Don't forget to unmute this time.
What a long wait to find out that I've got nothing useful to add.